It began with whispers that grew louder than any royal decree. William said no. At first, it was dismissed as idle gossip, the kind that drifts through marble halls and dies in silence. But this time, the words carried weight enough to rattle centuries of tradition. Cancelling a royal state visit wasn't just bold, it was unprecedented. For days, the corridors of Buckingham Palace buzzed with disbelief. Camilla had spent months preparing for the diplomatic tour, the gowns, the receptions, the speeches, all carefully orchestrated to cement her position as the monarchy's steady hand. Yet, with one stroke of a pen, Prince William dismantled it all. The official statement was brief, almost clinical, scheduling conflicts. But everyone inside the palace knew that was a lie. Something deeper had shifted. Behind closed doors, tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Camilla's aides were furious, pacing through her private offices, demanding explanations from the royal press team. Her most trusted staff muttered that William had overstepped, that this was a humiliation no queen consort should ever endure. But even they could see the truth. This wasn't a scheduling issue. It was a statement, a declaration of authority. William's advisors, calm and measured, insisted it was a strategic decision to realign royal priorities. But their composure only fueled suspicion. To override Camilla's plans meant crossing boundaries that even Charles had rarely touched. For the first time since ascending as Prince of Wales, William had drawn a line, one that split the monarchy into two camps. On one side stood the old guard, loyal to the queen consort, defending tradition and hierarchy. On the other, a younger, reformist faction quietly rallying behind William and Catherine, a couple determined to reshape the crown's image. To them, the cancellation wasn't rebellion, it was renewal. Yet to Camilla, it was betrayal. When the order reached her, she was said to have gone silent, the kind of silence that unnerves even seasoned courtiers. Hours later, her private secretary was seen leaving Kensington Palace pale and tight-lipped. The story was already leaking. Reporters camped outside the palace gates sensed something seismic. Within hours, headlines exploded. Power struggle in the palace, William defies the queen consort, who's really running the monarchy? The royal press offices scrambled, releasing carefully worded denials that contradicted each other. From Clarence House came a message emphasizing unity, while from Kensington, another subtly reaffirmed William's commitment to modern leadership. Behind the diplomatic language, a quieter revolution was underway. Royal correspondents noted a subtle shift in tone during briefings. Catherine's initiatives began taking precedence over Camilla's. Invitations once addressed to the Queen Consort were quietly redirected to the Princess of Wales. It wasn't just about a trip anymore. It was about influence, optics, and who truly spoke for the future of the monarchy. Camilla, once untouchable, suddenly found herself sidelined. For years, she had mastered the art of quiet control, shaping narratives, balancing Charles's temper, outmaneuvering critics. But now, her control was slipping, and no amount of palace spin could disguise it. What made it worse was Catherine's silence. While others panicked, Catherine stayed composed, her schedule filled with charitable visits and calm public appearances. Her quiet grace contrasted sharply with Camilla's visible frustration. It was as if she knew that the best power move was to say nothing at all. Inside the palace, one phrase began circulating among staff: "The crown is shifting." They said it half in jest, half in awe. But even they couldn't deny the feeling that something irreversible had begun. William's defiance wasn't a mistake or a moment of temper. It was a calculated act, a message to the entire institution that the old way of doing things was over. But this wasn't about one cancelled trip, it was the beginning of a silent coup within the palace walls. In the stillness of Clarence House, silence was no longer a formality, it was a weapon. Phones were confiscated, aides dismissed, and conversations reduced to whispers that carried the weight of betrayal. Meetings once held in grand salons now took place behind locked doors, with trusted staff standing guard outside. Something inside the royal establishment had cracked. Every step, every word, every decision was being watched, recorded, and interpreted. The balance of power had shifted, but no one dared to name it aloud. Because within those walls, one question haunted everyone who truly controlled the monarchy now. For Camilla, it was more than a challenge. It was survival. Her reign as the quiet stabilizer of the crown was suddenly under siege, her authority questioned by the very generation she once helped shield. But William's defiance had awakened a new energy, one rooted not in rebellion, but in conviction. He wasn't just a son or an heir anymore. He was a man who had decided that the crown could no longer belong to the past. The word he used in private meetings was modernization. He spoke of transparency, accountability, and purpose ideals that made his father's court look like a relic of another age. And at his side, Catherine became more than his partner. She became the mirror of what the monarchy could be if compassion replaced protocol. Their late-night discussions at Kensington were no longer about appearances, they were about principles. Advisors, once cautious and discreet, began aligning themselves with one side or the other. Some remained loyal to Camilla and her traditionalists, believing the monarchy's strength lay in its secrecy. Others gravitated toward William and Catherine, drawn to their promise of renewal. The quiet reshuffling began. Schedulers were reassigned. Press secretaries were moved. Invitations were redirected. The palace map was redrawn, not in stone or ink, but in allegiance. Camilla could feel the ground slipping beneath her. Her allies in the press, long her shield against public criticism, began planting stories meant to undermine Catherine's image. Subtle at first, then vicious. Whispers of fatigue, of emotional strain, of a princess out of her depth. Headlines questioned her ability to handle royal pressures, portraying her as fragile beneath the facade of composure. But those who knew Catherine understood that silence didn't mean weakness, it meant preparation. She saw the attacks not as insults, but as signs of fear, and though the barrage wounded her deeply, she carried herself with poise that only infuriated her detractors further. Behind the scenes, a quiet Cold War raged. Camilla's confidants accused William's circle of undermining royal unity, while William's aides countered that the Queen Consort's camp was leaking sensitive information to the media. Lines were drawn, trust evaporated, and the very institution built on discretion began to devour itself from within. Charles, ever the mediator, found himself paralyzed, unable to quell the storm without choosing a side. But beneath the diplomacy and denial, it was clear, this was no misunderstanding. It was a battle for the soul of the monarchy. And in the center of it all stood Catherine, torn between loyalty and legacy. Her instinct was to heal, to calm the waves that threatened to drown the family she'd married into. But each attempt at peace only made her a larger target. Every gesture, every word, every silence became ammunition for one side or the other. She began to realize that diplomacy might no longer be enough. To protect the future, she would have to take a stand, even if it meant confronting the ghosts that ruled the palace from the shadows. Tension built quietly, suffocatingly, as those within the royal circle began to anticipate a breaking point. The walls of Clarence House, once symbols of prestige, now felt like the walls of a fortress under siege, and though no one could see it yet, the battle lines had already been drawn in ink that could never be erased. But the true spark of rebellion came not from the palace, it came from a leaked email. It began with a single document, a simple internal memo meant for only a handful of royal eyes. Yet within hours, it became the spark that set the monarchy ablaze. The leak appeared online without warning, posted anonymously on a small but well-connected political blog. At first, few paid attention, but then came the image, a scanned itinerary stamped with the royal seal. It detailed an upcoming state visit to Paris, personally led by Her Majesty the Queen Consort, representing the crown. And just below that title, written in sharp, unmistakable red ink, were two words that tore through the palace like thunder. Authorization revoked. The effect was instant. Phones rang non-stop. Reporters camped outside every royal residence. Within minutes, the leak had spread from niche political circles to front-page headlines. Palace in crisis. Power struggle at the top. William overrules Camilla. The world had questions, and no one inside the palace seemed willing to answer them. But among those who recognized the handwriting, a quiet panic took hold. Some claimed the red scrawl matched William's signature style, the same sharp, deliberate lettering used in official documents from Kensington Palace. Others insisted it was a forgery, a ploy to create chaos. The truth didn't matter. The damage was done. Camilla's team went into overdrive, furious and humiliated. Her aides demanded an internal investigation, calling the leak an act of deliberate sabotage. Behind the polished smiles, accusations flew like daggers. Clarence House officials whispered that Kensington had orchestrated the exposure to embarrass the Queen Consort. Kensington denied it, calling the claims deeply disappointing. But the press didn't need proof to feast on the story. All they needed was speculation. And speculation became wildfire. Royal correspondents began drawing their own conclusions, crafting narratives of betrayal and control. William, they said, was tired of Camilla's growing influence, her constant push to redefine her role, to step into international limelight. Catherine, on the other hand, was portrayed as the quiet strategist, the elegant architect behind a new royal order. Her silence became its own message, one that spoke louder than any denial. She neither confirmed nor denied the rumors, offering only the composed grace of someone who knew the storm would eventually destroy itself. To many, that silence was not submission. It was control. Behind palace doors, however, the mood was far from calm. Charles was livid, demanding answers from both households. Meetings stretched long into the night, filled with tight voices and veiled threats. Camilla confronted senior aides, her composure cracking as she demanded to know how her private plans had been exposed. Her anger wasn't just about the trip, it was about humiliation. For years, she had fought for acceptance, slowly transforming public opinion. Now, in one brutal moment, that progress had been undone. William, meanwhile, faced his own reckoning. Advisors warned him that the narrative was spiraling. The press painted him as ruthless, defiant, and power-hungry, the prince who dared to silence the Queen. Supporters called him bold, critics called him reckless. But deep down, he understood that this was bigger than public relations. It was about who shaped the monarchy's future, the old guard or the next generation. His decision to stay silent only fueled the fire, allowing gossip to evolve into legend. Every tabloid wanted a villain, every journalist wanted a quote, yet the royal family gave them nothing but silence. And in that silence, the world began to choose sides. Some saw Camilla as the wounded queen, betrayed by her stepson. Others saw William and Catherine as the rightful heirs of a more moral, modern crown. The institution that prided itself on unity was fracturing before the public's eyes. The official inquiry never found the source of the leak. But within royal circles, the damage was permanent. Trust, once broken, never returned. From that day forward, every handshake felt cautious, every smile rehearsed. What began as an administrative cancellation had transformed into a symbol, a sign that the crown's foundations were no longer unshakable. And yet, the true story behind that red ink was only beginning to unfold. Because the fallout from that leak didn't end in headlines, it reignited a rivalry decades in the making. For William, every decision he made carried the quiet weight of his mother's name. Diana was gone, but her shadow had never left him. It lived in the public's gaze, in every comparison, in every whisper that measured his compassion against his father's restraint. Even now, years later, her memory still haunted the palace halls not as a ghost of sorrow, but as a symbol of what the monarchy had lost. The people had adored her because she defied the rules that caged her. She had shown humanity in a world built on distance. And to many, William's decision to cancel Camilla's trip wasn't about politics or protocol. It was about reclaiming something sacred. The woman who replaced his mother had taken the spotlight for too long. This time, William wasn't just protecting the crown. He was protecting her memory. Behind closed doors, the emotional toll of that legacy often left him torn between duty and conscience. Those who saw him up close spoke of moments when the calm, measured prince would suddenly fall into silence, his jaw tight, his eyes distant. Catherine understood those silences better than anyone. She knew when to speak, when to listen, and when to simply stay by his side. She had seen the burden that came with being Diana's son, the expectations, the comparisons, the grief that never fully healed, and she carried that weight with him, quietly, without asking for recognition. In her presence, William found not just love, but balance, the kind his mother had longed for and never received. But the outside world had no mercy. The press began to draw their own connections, weaving a narrative that neither William nor Catherine could control. Headlines declared Catherine the new Diana, the reincarnation of the people's princess, graceful, empathetic, adored. Her presence in public events drew the same kind of warmth and emotion Diana once inspired. Crowds cheered her name, photographs of her with children and hospital patients flooded the media, and comparisons became impossible to escape. It was flattering, but it was dangerous. For Camilla, it wasn't admiration, it was erasure. Each glowing headline for Catherine dimmed her own relevance. Every kind word for the Princess of Wales was a reminder of how fragile her position truly was. Behind the veneer of civility, Camilla's discomfort began to show. Her allies whispered of unfair treatment, of orchestrated public relations tactics designed to elevate Catherine at her expense. In truth, Catherine had done nothing of the sort. Her rise wasn't engineered, it was natural, inevitable. The people saw in her what they had once seen in Diana: warmth, humility, authenticity. But for Camilla, who had fought decades for acceptance, it felt like betrayal all over again. Old insecurities resurfaced, and with them came quiet resentment. It wasn't jealousy in the ordinary sense, it was fear. Fear that history was repeating itself, and that once again, the world would side with Diana's legacy over hers. In those tense weeks, William and Catherine found themselves navigating not just politics, but emotion, a battle between past wounds and present responsibilities. Late at night, when the palace was still and the headlines had stopped screaming, the two would sit together in quiet reflection. William would speak of his mother not as the public icon she became, but as the woman he remembered, kind, flawed, radiant, trapped. Catherine would listen, her hand steady in his, reminding him that the cycle didn't have to repeat. "You're not your father," she once told him softly, "and I'm not her." It wasn't defiance, it was reassurance, the kind of reassurance that allowed him to breathe again. In that fragile space between memory and duty, a transformation began. Catherine wasn't just a partner anymore, she was becoming the heart of the institution itself. Her calm strength, her empathy, her restraint, these were no longer personal virtues. They were the qualities the monarchy desperately needed to survive. And though William didn't say it aloud, he knew the truth. Diana's spirit hadn't vanished. It had simply found a new voice. As the ghosts of the past stirred, the palace turned its gaze toward the future and Catherine's unexpected ascension. When the cameras flashed again, the world noticed a shift, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. Catherine wasn't standing in William's shadow anymore. She was leading. Her calm confidence and measured words began to reshape the monarchy's public image, giving it a sense of grace and purpose that had long been missing. Invitations once addressed to Her Majesty the Queen Consort were quietly replaced with a new name, Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales. The gesture seemed administrative, but to those who understood the undercurrents of royal politics, it was seismic. It marked a transfer of influence, one that neither King Charles nor Camilla could publicly challenge. Catherine had become the face the monarchy needed, a bridge between old-world tradition and modern compassion. Her emergence came not through grand speeches or political maneuvering, but through quiet, deliberate action. Every engagement she attended carried meaning. Every cause she supported reflected empathy, not formality. When she met ordinary families, comforted grieving children, or stood beside health workers, the cameras didn't just capture a royal figure, they captured a woman who embodied warmth and stability in a world tired of cold aristocracy. The public, once skeptical of anyone replacing Diana in their hearts, began to draw the inevitable comparisons. "The People's Princess Reborn," one headline read, echoing across continents. But Catherine wasn't a reflection of the past, she was its evolution. Where Diana rebelled, Catherine redefined. Behind this transformation stood William, who had grown more assertive in shaping the monarchy's direction. He began repositioning the royal family as a symbol of moral renewal, grounded not in bloodlines but in character. Together, he and Catherine projected unity, not the staged unity of press releases, but the kind born from mutual trust. Their synergy was effortless, and that terrified their rivals. For years, the institution had relied on hierarchy and age to maintain control. But William and Catherine were rewriting that order without ever saying so aloud. Even courtiers began whispering that the true leadership of the monarchy was no longer in Charles's hands. It had shifted quietly, inevitably, into the next generation's grasp. Meanwhile, Camilla's world was shrinking. Her public appearances grew fewer, her smiles tighter, her energy dimmer. Once surrounded by loyal advisors and sympathetic reporters, she now faced dwindling influence and increasing scrutiny. Behind palace walls, her frustration was palpable. Each headline praising Catherine felt like a cut. Each photograph of the new royal couple, a reminder that she was being written out of the narrative. Her attempts to regain footing through charity events and interviews only highlighted the contrast. Where Catherine's presence felt effortless, Camilla's seemed forced. The harder she tried to prove relevance, the more the world turned away. Through it all, Catherine remained untouched by drama. Her strength was her silence, a silence that spoke volumes. While others fought for recognition, she simply was. In moments where anger could have erupted, she chose dignity. In moments of triumph, she chose humility. And in that restraint lay her true power. The monarchy, once battered by scandals and divisions, began to heal under her soft guidance. Even those who once doubted her now admired the balance. She brought a balance between tradition and empathy, grace and resilience. But beneath the calm surface, deeper tensions simmered. For every step Catherine took forward, Camilla felt herself pushed further into the background. The contrast between them, one serene, one seething, became the defining dynamic of the royal household. Those closest to the throne could sense that something was coming. Because as Catherine's star rose higher than ever before, Camilla's silence began to twist into resolve. And just when it seemed that the monarchy had finally found peace, the old queen consort made a decision that would shatter the illusion of harmony. Because the true storm broke when Camilla decided she wouldn't go down quietly. Camilla had endured every humiliation the crown could throw at her, the whispered scandals, the public's coldness, the years of being the other woman. She had clawed her way from national disdain to reluctant acceptance, and she wasn't about to be erased now. In her mind, Catherine's rise wasn't destiny, it was theft. So, as the public adored the new Princess of Wales, Camilla quietly began to rebuild her power. She called in old favours, whispered to editors she'd once charmed, and reminded loyal journalists that they owed their access to her. What began as soft gossip soon turned into a storm one, designed to break the image of perfection surrounding William and Catherine. It started with subtle headlines, questions about Catherine's health, her workload, her fragile demeanour. Then came the insinuations of marital strain, late-night arguments, and emotional exhaustion. Each article carried the same undertone. Was the golden couple cracking under pressure? The attacks were surgical, precise, and relentless. It was a masterclass in quiet revenge. And though no one could prove the source, those closest to the palace knew exactly where the leaks began. For years, Camilla had built relationships with powerful editors, trading private insights for favourable coverage. Now, those old connections were her battlefield. Catherine, ever composed in public, began to feel the strain in private. The tabloid cruelty, the twisting of her silence into weakness, cut deeper than she admitted. Friends noticed the subtle changes. Fewer smiles, shorter answers, nights where sleep refused to come. She had faced criticism before, but this was different. It was coordinated, personal, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of what Diana had endured, the suffocating mix of scrutiny, speculation, and half-truths designed to break a royal woman from within. Yet, unlike Diana, Catherine refused to let the pain consume her. She chose patience, observation. Because she knew something the others didn't, that this fight wasn't about headlines. It was about who the public would believe. But William couldn't stay silent. His anger boiled beneath his calm exterior, ready to erupt. Those who were present in the palace during those weeks described tense meetings, raised voices, and slammed doors. William had always respected his stepmother, tolerated her, even for the sake of peace. But now, he saw her differently, as a threat to everything he and Catherine had built. Behind closed doors, he confronted his father. The conversation was short, sharp, and devastating. William accused Camilla of orchestrating a smear campaign. Charles defended her, insisting she was the victim of unfounded paranoia. The words that followed fractured what little unity remained. Father and son left that room changed, no longer allies, but rivals bound by blood and duty. And then came the leak that turned the quiet war into open chaos. A phone call, private, emotional, and never meant for public ears, surfaced online. In it, William could be heard expressing anger and despair over betrayal within the family. The tabloids devoured it, dissecting every word, every breath, every pause. Who had leaked it? No one knew for sure. Some blamed Camilla's camp. Others suggested palace staff loyal to her had done the deed. Either way, the damage was catastrophic. Overnight, the monarchy's carefully rebuilt image crumbled. The institution faced its most brutal public relations crisis in a decade. Commentators called it a civil war under crowns. The royal brand, once shielded by unity, now bled through cracks visible to the world. Charles, torn between his wife and his heir, found himself paralyzed, a monarch unable to command his own family. Camilla's retaliation had achieved its goal. She was back at the center of the storm. But in her victory, she had miscalculated, because while William's rage burned hot, Catherine's resolve burned cold. And then, just when the monarchy seemed ready to implode, Catherine made a move no one saw coming. While the world devoured scandal, Catherine did something few expected. She stayed silent. No rebuttals, no interviews, no carefully worded statements released through palace aides. Just silence. A silence so deliberate it became its own kind of statement. While others tried to explain, defend, or control the narrative, she stepped back and let the storm exhaust itself. And when the noise finally began to fade, what remained was her unwavering composure, calm, dignified, untouchable. In an age where every word is dissected, her refusal to engage became her greatest power. Instead of reacting, she redirected. While tabloids spun theories and commentators speculated, Catherine returned to what she did best: service. She visited children's hospitals, consoled grieving parents, and met with mental health advocates. Each appearance felt effortless, but it carried weight. Her gestures weren't grand, but they were human. People saw through the chaos and found something unshakable in her quiet strength. They began to realize that while others chased control through influence and manipulation, Catherine commanded respect through restraint. The press could twist her silence into weakness, but the public knew better. They saw a woman who refused to let bitterness define her. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Opinion columns shifted from critique to admiration. International outlets praised her for her poise under pressure. Foreign leaders who once hesitated to comment publicly now lauded her sense of duty and dignity. The headlines that once pitted her against Camilla transformed into tributes to her endurance. The embodiment of grace, one article declared. Unmoved by chaos, unwavering in purpose, said another. What had started as an attack campaign had backfired spectacularly. Camilla's attempts to tarnish Catherine had only amplified her glow. Every bitter whisper, every cynical story only made Catherine's silence more powerful, more royal. Camilla, meanwhile, began to feel the isolation she once imposed on others. Her allies in the press grew distant, unwilling to attach themselves to a narrative that had turned toxic. The palace staff, who had once served her loyally, began migrating toward the new centre of power, Kensington. Even her husband, King Charles, seemed weary of the tension. He admired his wife's resilience, yes, but he couldn't deny that the public had shifted its allegiance. Catherine now represented what the monarchy wanted to be: compassionate, unifying, and forward-looking. Camilla represented what it feared becoming defensive, divided, and outdated. Inside palace walls, the transformation didn't go unnoticed. William watched his wife with quiet pride, fully aware of what her composure had achieved. She hadn't just survived the smear campaign, she'd transcended it. He saw in her the very qualities his mother had embodied, not through rebellion but through balance. Where Diana had been fire, Catherine was steel, calm, deliberate, enduring. And for the first time, William understood what leadership looked like when it came not from command, but from character. Her defining moment came when the crown faced a delicate diplomatic crisis. With Charles unwell and Camilla absent from public life, Catherine was asked to represent the monarchy at an international summit, a first for any Princess of Wales in decades. The world watched as she stood before global leaders, confident yet humble, embodying the very stability the royal family had lost. Her speech, measured and sincere, was described as the rebirth of British grace. It was the moment even her critics had to admit she was no longer just a royal figure. She was the monarchy's heart, and yet, behind the adoration and calm triumph, new murmurs began to surface. Whispers that William's assertiveness had gone too far, that by empowering Catherine, he had quietly rewritten the monarchy's internal order, one where loyalty to tradition was slowly being replaced by loyalty to them. And as Catherine's star rose higher than ever, one question began echoing through every corridor of the palace. Had William gone too far in reshaping the royal throne itself? When King Charles returned from his retreat at Balmoral, he came back to a monarchy that no longer looked like the one he had left behind. The landscape had changed subtly at first, then completely. What once balanced on the weight of tradition now tilted toward something new, something unmistakably shaped by William and Catherine. The air around him felt different, charged with quiet defiance and controlled confidence. Advisors waited in hushed anxiety, briefing him on the storm that had brewed in his absence, the cancelled engagements, the public's fervent embrace of the younger royals, and the whispering corridors that no longer echoed with loyalty, but with uncertainty. They begged him to act, to reassert control, to restore the balance that Camilla's absence had broken. But Charles didn't move. He listened, he nodded, and then he retreated once more, not into solitude, but into thought. For the first time, the king began to question if his crown still commanded power, or if it had merely become a symbol, overshadowed by his heir's rising influence. Behind the palace doors, Camilla was unraveling. Stripped of visibility and humiliated by silence, she pleaded with Charles to step forward, to remind the world who truly ruled. Her voice, usually tempered with regal restraint, now carried desperation. "You must put an end to this," she reportedly told him. But Charles, ever the thinker, hesitated. He understood that any attempt to reinstate her might only deepen the divide. The public adored Catherine. The press had crowned her long before he could correct them. To oppose that tide would make him look out of touch, weak, or worse, jealous of his own son's growing popularity. He loved his wife, but he also feared the cost of defending her. So, in his silence, he did what kings have done for centuries. When power slips through their fingers, he waited, hoping time would correct what courage could not. But William had no intention of waiting. In private meetings with senior courtiers, his tone was steady, his words deliberate. He spoke of modernization, efficiency, and public trust. He was polite, but immovable. The king's advisors described his demeanor as icy calm, the kind of confidence that comes not from arrogance, but from certainty. He was the future, and everyone in the room knew it. The divide between father and son deepened, not through open conflict, but through unspoken truth. William represented progress. Charles represented preservation, and the monarchy, for the first time in living memory, stood at a crossroads with no clear leader. Outside the palace, speculation grew rampant. Newspapers began floating the word abdication. Columnists questioned whether Charles had the strength to lead through an era demanding evolution, not endurance. Opinion polls hinted at the unthinkable, a public increasingly ready to move on. The image of a weary king retreating from confrontation stood in stark contrast to the poised, energetic faces of William and Catherine, who carried on with engagements that no longer needed royal approval. They were acting as monarchs already, and no one dared correct them. In a last attempt to restore order, Charles summoned a family summit at Windsor. The gathering was described by one insider as a Cold War in crowns. There were no raised voices, no shouting, only silence sharpened by tension. Camilla sat stone-faced, William's expression unreadable, Catherine composed yet distant. The words exchanged were few, but the meaning was clear. The monarchy was no longer united by duty, but divided by design. When the meeting ended, nothing had been resolved. The crown, once a symbol of continuity, now felt fragile, suspended between past and future, between fear and inevitability. That night, as the palace lights dimmed, Charles stared out over the gardens, a man burdened by the weight of both legacy and love. He knew the balance could not hold much longer. The whispers of abdication had become a roar in the world beyond the gates, and within his own family, the succession had already begun not by decree, but by dominance. And then, in a move that shocked even his closest advisors, Charles made the call that would change royal history forever. It came as a single sentence, brief, cold, and world-shaking. All forthcoming state duties will be overseen by the Prince and Princess of Wales. No mention of Camilla, no explanation, no hint of restoration, just a quiet statement buried in the official palace release. But in that moment, the transition became complete. Without fanfare or proclamation, the monarchy had redrawn its own lines of power. Camilla's name, once a fixture in every royal program, had vanished as though it had never existed. The message was unmistakable. Her chapter had closed, and standing in her place, calm, composed, unshakable, was Catherine, the new face of royal strength. The announcement marked not just an administrative change, but a revolution in tone. For William, it was the culmination of everything he had fought for, the reclamation of a moral monarchy, one that reflected empathy rather than entitlement. Yet, behind his quiet triumph was a storm of emotion. The decision carried the ghost of his mother's legacy, the weight of unfinished stories and broken promises. As the words of the official statement echoed across television screens and headlines, he couldn't ignore the sense that Diana's vision, a monarchy rooted in humanity, had finally been realized. What had once been tragedy was now transformation. And though he would never say it aloud, he knew this was the moment his mother's shadow finally became light. Camilla, however, saw the same announcement as her undoing. There were no dramatic exits, no public tears, just silence. She withdrew from engagements, citing health and fatigue, her name quietly fading from future appearances. Behind closed doors, she had become a ghost of her former self, watching as the empire she had fought to claim slipped through her fingers. Those closest to her said she no longer trusted the institution she once helped shape. For decades, she had survived scandal, criticism, and exile, but she could not survive irrelevance. Her allies, once loyal to her charm and cunning, now looked toward Kensington. The Queen Consort's reign had ended, not with scandal or rebellion, but with quiet inevitability. Catherine, meanwhile, bore her new role not with arrogance, but gravity. The weight of expectation was immense. The crown had made her not just a figure of admiration, but the living symbol of its rebirth. Every move she made carried meaning, every silence became statement. She didn't seek to dominate the throne, she simply embodied what it had forgotten: empathy, strength, and purpose. She accepted the responsibility not as conquest, but as duty, and in that acceptance, the monarchy found something it hadn't possessed in years: genuine trust. Across the world, leaders, diplomats, and citizens took notice. Global admiration poured in, not because of titles, but because of character. In a world fatigued by spectacle, Catherine and William represented something rare: restraint, unity, and quiet conviction. Together, they stood as symbols of renewal, bridging the gap between history and modernity. The monarchy's survival had never depended on tradition alone. It depended on its ability to evolve, and now, under their stewardship, it finally had. The transformation was complete, not through rebellion, but through resolve. What had begun as a feud had ended as a succession, one unspoken yet undeniable. The crown's power no longer resided in bloodlines or lineage, but in hearts, in the respect it could earn, rather than the authority it could demand. And as the palace lights dimmed that night, one truth echoed through every hall: the age of Camilla had ended, and the era of Catherine had begun.